Right, good day everybody, and welcome back to once again Red Hot Talk, and hope you guys are well. We are back after another interruption last week, as both Rod and I went to a Nope, I think I'm back.
Oh, you're back. You're back.
I'm back. Right, I'm still having some trouble with the audio, so please do bear with me. So I'm investigating at the moment, and so there will be some sort of I think some hiccups today, and I'm trying to resolve, but I don't think I can do anything unless I actually change the hardware. So I will do so after today's chat, and hopefully next week will be back to normal. But yes, Rod and I went to an Adobe event last week, which was quite fun, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Particularly enjoyed the canapes. They were good. Software,
oh yes,
yeah, it's fine, but the canapes were good.
Which has kind of brought me to today's discussion, really. And I think it's gonna, and I think it'll be quite good. I think have a little bit of a discussion about AI and computational photography. And I think certainly it's something that people will be wholeheartedly support, and some people would be very disgusted about the idea of having artificial intelligence in our photographer's life. First of all, I mean, in your view, Rod, what do you think about like let's forget about AI first, but just computational stuff in general. You know, where okay, kind of initiated the computational stuff. We have live bulb, live ND, and now we have live like gradual live ND filters and all sorts of stuff. These are great tools in my eyes. I mean, I think they are very, very well. And I also want people who are listening right now, I mean, give me your thoughts and feel about computational photography or features in your camera, and how does it help your photography, whether they are it or where you are still a bit of an old school photographer, that we prefer to use a a physical filter to do your photography work, whether you're going to use a tripod to stabilize your camera rather than using IBIS. You think IBIS is still has limitations. I would like to hear from you. But what in general about computational photography, what do you think about it? Like, is it a good invention? Is it like that we cheating, in a way, and in today's digital photography?
Yeah, but we've always cheated. I think possibly is that things are changing, but we've always cheated. I mean, to my mind, there's really not much difference between using a physical ND landscape or using equivalent. The aim is still the same: to control the light in your scene and to make the image come out as you want it to, perhaps not necessarily as it actually is. So the only difference, as far as I can see, is the method. And I think things like live bulb is just made doing long exposures easier. It hasn't made them possible, it's just made them easier. So I think a lot of the computational features we're looking at or we're talking about, they are digital equivalent to what we were doing anyway, or they're just there to make it easier to get a good result rather than just having to guess. So I don't have a particular issue with computational photography, and I think somebody uses a phone. I'm really very glad that my phone does HDR, because very often it copes with a high contrast or high brightness range scene a lot better than any camera I use. So I'm quite glad of that. I don't have anything in principle against computational photography.
That's good. I mean, I want to hear from you guys as well.
As to whether it's cheating, it depends on whether you want photography to be more difficult. I mean, I know that's a very provocative way of putting it, but I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, it's I prefer using physical objects to digital ones. That's
Right.
true. But
Right.
then if a digital version makes a whole lot more sense, it's more reliable, quicker, and better. I'd be a bit silly just to persevere with the old methods.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting in my eyes about the whole computational inventions. How digitally manipulated aspects of the image itself is almost like we're talking back when we had this transition from analog photography to digital photography, and people were, oh, you see a lot of digital artifacts, you see blocks instead of grains, and they always have a debate, and oh, analog is still better, like you got better tonalities, you got better gradations, you got this and that, compared to digital. But that was the early days, and we are still talking about the early days of computational stuff, even though it's been around for quite a few years already. But you see how let's say OM system has improved the live ND features since the first generation that we are happening right. The latest OM1 Mark II has probably the third gen of live ND. So you see things are definitely getting better. There are less artifact when it comes to movements. It does look more natural. So things are going to be better as the computer being trained better, and then they will produce results more natural to the eyes. But I can still see the use of like traditional filters being the hardcore, the extreme long exposure photography for who want to do like 30, 40, few minutes, 10 minutes long exposure shots at night, for instance, and they will still prefer to having a physical filters to make sure that they get the best quality of shots or more natural shots that they can achieve compared to a digitally manipulated images.
Yeah, I think what you said before about analog versus digital, they are different. They do give a different look. So I think if you're talking about computational photography, you might get a different look. It might not be exactly the same. I think as far as the long exposure live ND thing is concerned, for me, it really doesn't go quite far enough. I think if you want to get that really smooth long exposure look, you really need about 10 stops if you're going out in broad daylight.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you have to wait for dusk, say. And if
yeah,
you can wait for dusk, well, you don't need an NG filter. You just wait another 5 minutes till it's like a few stops darker. So I think
yeah.
I'd be more interested in the live ND if it was stronger, because for
Mm,
me it's just not quite strong enough yet. The other thing, the live ND grad, that is interesting. Particularly, I don't know. You'll have to tell me, Jimmy, if it can account for buildings in the scene and not include them in the darkening effect. I don't know. That would be particularly clever. But at the moment, I think
yeah.
I think I would do most of my work in software,
Well,
because
the
that way you
the
just get more control.
yeah, I mean the live ND features, the live grad ND features, it actually behaves like a traditional grad filter. So it
Right. So it
doesn't,
does darken everything. Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
darkens everything. It doesn't discount anything. It's not that clever just yet,
No.
but you never
No.
know. You never know, and I think
No.
in time that could happen. But even when you do something similar in Lightroom at the moment, you do apply gradual, I wouldn't say filter in what do you call this? And in Lightroom when you have these layers,
Gradients,
yes,
graduated, the
and
mask.
yeah, you have to physically subtract, the buildings yourself.
Yeah, you do. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort, but it does add an extra step. I think the way you would do it, you'd create your linear gradient, and then you would subtract the foreground subject from that mask. Alternatively, what I do more often is I use the AI mask
Yep.
in Lightroom, which is too hard edge. It just goes straight to the horizon. That's really no good. But then I intersect that with a gradient,
Yep.
so that it's still only selecting the sky, but it you get a graduated effect in the sky instead of it just going to the horizon and stopping. So
Yeah.
that's the way I do it. AI sky mask and then intersect it with a linear gradient What a Lightroom nerd I am. That's how I do it. That's how I
Well,
do it.
you are the expert, but certainly, something Adobe is brewing, in the distance, and I don't know, man. I don't know how many of you are Adobe users out there at the moment, who are listening right now. I mean, I use multiple different software, but I think Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop is still kind of my primary software that I use for my work, so to speak. I mean, I do use the DxO Photo Lab to do some occasional editings if I have the time to basically fine tune one particular photos. And I do like the viewpoint, because the viewpoints are very powerful tools that can be very selective, not only for like exposures and contrast, but all sorts of things. So like you can be quite precise when it comes to that sort of adjustments, and quite useful in that sense. But anyway, let's go back to a little bit about the computational stuff now. I went to Japan this last month, and I did use a lot of the live ND features, in particular trying to create certain effects, let's say the people moving around on the street, and these sort of things are quite kind of handy when you have a stabilized lens together, so then you're maximizing the IBIS combined, so you got like 8.5 stops in the OM1 Mark II, for instance. So I can do some relatively slow shutter in broad daylight to create that kind of together with the live ND, so to create some sort of motion blur effects. So that is quite cool, and that's something that I think is quite handy in a way that when it comes to computer features like that, is because I don't have to attach or detach the ND filters after the shot. So let's say after the long exposure shot, I just want to quickly turn around, snap something. I can just switch off the live ND. More photography. Physically take off the filter, so that would be quite interesting. I think it's convenience. I think to me, a lot of this computation is definitely convenience, and it does achieve acceptable result, if not perfect results at this moment in time. I think that if you really want the most natural long exposure blur or motion blur, I think a filter will probably still better. Together, that depending on how sunny the weather is, that I often find that when you use live ND, you are really pushing the system to the max, because you can only do so much for the computer to understand where the motion happens. So that is probably why I think that the live ND feature, while it's great, there are still some limitation when it comes to actual practicality, or the practical side of it when you're shooting broad daylight, bright sunny day. I'm talking about specifically, because I think that in Japan, in Tokyo this time, more specifically, there were a couple of really bright sunny day, and I was having to stop the lens down to f/22. And have to use low ISO setting, extended low, which is L50, I believe, in the OM1 Mark II. So ISO 50, f/22, and it's still a little bit too bright for the sensor to detect any movement. So that is, I think, where the limitation draws for live ND usefulness. So you really have to cut down the light quite dramatically in such condition.
Yeah, I think just to be clear, we're distinguishing computational photography from AI, aren't we? So to my mind, computational photography is just a technical process that doesn't involve any kind of artificial intelligence or cheating in that sense. I don't think computational photography is cheating, actually. It's just a more complex and sophisticated way of making a capture, I think. But
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there was debate about let's say, not live ND. Let's go back to a bit of live bulb or live composite features, which is fantastic. I love those features.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the hardcore photographers used to, like experts in photographing firework, for instance, and or nighttime long exposure photography. They would tell you a thing or two about, like, how to do it manually, or the old school way, and they always say, you always get the best result for doing this and that. Experience trumps over whatever technology is coming out these days, and so there's always this discussion there for those who know how to do it, for those who don't know how to do it but now have the feature to let them do it quite effectively. And so from the experienced photographer point of view, they say, "Oh, you are just cheating because you haven't learned the basic. You haven't learned about the theory."
Well, there is. I think you probably still need to know a little bit of theory. That's a slightly different thing, isn't it? I think we'll always have this,
Yeah,
where if you've learned a craft that's quite difficult and suddenly it's easy, you're
yeah,
always going to feel a bit miffed that you did all that work for nothing and now anyone can do it. So I
yeah,
can understand. I can understand. I can understand that certainly. I've never been a big fan of filters, so I've always found them. I mean, they're somewhat expensive. They're quite fiddly to use. Sometimes you need to do a bit of calculation. They don't always do what you expect. For example, many of my shots are with wide angle lenses,
yep,
and I can't really use a polarizing filter for skies because the angle of the filter, the effect, is too narrow. So it
yeah,
makes your sky look blue in the middle and pale at the edges. It doesn't work.
yeah,
And similarly, if you use ND grads, physical filters, it's very easy to fall into the trap of composing your shots so that you don't have anything going up into the air. So
yeah,
it's kind of changing the way you take photographs, which isn't ideal. But yeah, I think filters need some skill, and there's a bit of craft in that. But I'm not a huge fan myself. But if you are a user of filters and you like them, I think you should carry on using them, because I don't think the kind of computational features we're talking about are superior. They just make things easier for people who don't want to go through that particular process. And I think
yep,
if you use magnetic filters, who makes those? Case does, doesn't it? And some others. If you
yeah.
use magnetic filters, it doesn't take long to put a 10 stop ND
No,
filter on your lens and then take it
no,
off again.
no. I mean, I still, I think that what you just said, it makes sense as well. And personally, I don't like using physical filters for two reasons. I mean, I had to for filming, for instance, and but
Yeah,
generally, I don't like using them, not because they're not effective in my case, but it's more to do with the variation in filter sizes that I have in my collections. Like, if take out a bunch of lenses out, and then they all have different filter sizes, and it's just a
yeah,
nightmare to have a whole bunch of step up, step down rings. For instance, if you just
yeah.
use a big filter to cover all of them, or you just have to buy different sets of filters for different lenses, and then that's what really kind of annoy me.
And
It
you
just,
get the wrong one out.
yeah, which happened to me a couple of times.
I've got out the 67. I wanted the 62.
Yeah, it's just annoying.
Yeah,
It's really, really annoying in that sense. And because a lot of the wide angle lenses tend to have a big front. They're all like 67, 77.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
usually
yeah,
bigger front compared to normal primes. They're usually a 55, 67. They're a lot smaller compared to the wide angle. So if I take
yeah.
a prime, for instance, and then a wide angle, they have to use two different sizes of filters because it just one is too big, one is too small, and it just really a case of inconvenience in that sense. So having
It
digital
is.
features, I think that makes sense in most cases, whether you want to argue about the effect or not. But I think in the convenience factor, like this time in Japan, I could easily swap between the 12 to 100 to a 40 to 150. I don't have to use any filter because there's no filter to use. You just
Yeah.
click a button, enable the feature, and it's all done for you in there.
Jimmy, I'm terribly sorry. Can you just give me 5 minutes? I've just had a message. I've just got to attend to something, but I'll be
Yep.
right back. Is that okay?
Yeah, not a problem at all.
I'm sorry about
Okay,
this.
so no
Sorry.
worry. So I'm gonna continue our live chat and while waiting for Rod to come back. So how are you guys feeling in terms of all the Michael Four Third computational features? I mean, are you enjoying them? Are you a frequent users of them? For instance, the live bulb and live composite, and also latest the live grad Andy, the live Andy, all these stuff. I think to me they are phenomenal features. I think they are really useful features. I do use them very often, especially if you want to do some occasional firework photography, for instance. I think live composite is really, really cool and awesome. It's almost getting you perfect shot every single time, and it's just very easy to use. You don't need to be an expert, like I said earlier. You don't need to be an experienced firework photographer to achieve something very similar. And of course, there are still some skills in relations to timing and all the other stuff. If you want to have the perfect fireworks shot, but if you just want to mess around with it a little bit, just to take something to remember the occasions or the event, yeah, it's actually something to behold of. I think that these features certainly allows me to do something that I'm not an expert of, and for most of you who know me long enough, that I'm a portrait guy, so I photograph people, nothing like a firework or night photography or anything like light painting, long exposure stuff. So I think these features certainly allow me to do all kinds of things like that, and it's very, in a sense, similar to, let's say, BERT AI recognition for all the latest digital cameras, and also all these pro capture stuff. It does allow me to do something that I previously thought impossible in my case, because I just simply don't have the expertise to capture, birds in flight, something unexpected. And a lot of these features certainly get me there. And I know I'm still haven't taken a perfect shot yet, and just because, like I said, I'm not an expert when it comes to that sort of executions, but it does allow me to try out, which is kind of cool things to do, right? As a photographer, if we have a camera, we have a lens, and there are so many things we can potentially do, but just depending on what sort of expertise or what sort of thing that you're into or photograph normally, and but because we have a camera, often that, when you're bored of whatever you're doing day in, day out, and suddenly you want to change a little bit, just change up the gear a little bit. When you go and hiking, you may want to take some a photo of the birds flying around, or macro stuff, some bugs, lurking around. You can actually do that quite easily now with a lot of the digital cameras, with all sorts of features that allow you to do that. That I think is actually pretty cool. So I'm gonna wait until Rod comes back, then we'll talk a little bit about AI. But I just want you guys to maybe keep in mind what AI means to you, because it's going to be an important topic, simply because I personally think that AI is not going away, and AI is going to stay. AI is going to get better, and AI is going to be used a lot, and possibly growing in an exponential rate for the next few years. So we're gonna have a little discussion about how you think AI could impact on your photography, whether you're going to use it, whether you're not going to use it. So it'd be quite good to understand from your perspective how you think about this whole new genre of photography, or a new genre of photography that utilize this kind of artificial intelligence features when it comes to editing or even generative. So this is going to be quite something to talk about. So let's see how you guys talking about, and maybe look at some comments right here. Color science. So Mike Crew actually said color science is computational photography. There's an interesting way of thinking. I'm not entirely sure in traditional camera making and the digital I'm talking about, color science is computational just yet. I mean, they do follow. It's still done manually with a bunch of colorists and the camera manufacturers, and looking at colors that they reproduce and represent, looking at like these reference monitor, looking at all these colors to basically want to see how accurate they think they are when it comes to representing all these. They do the test in. However, having said that, and actually, sorry, my audio inputs keep changing, so you might hear some disruption here and there. I think in terms of computational, color science computational stuff, the only camera that I know of at the moment that using artificial intelligence or computational is Alice, the AI camera. They do use actually computational experience, a learning algorithm from AI to actually determine the colors in camera, rather than using a standardized method to gauge red, blue, and green, and that kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting to see how Alice will progress over time. And certainly from my testing so far, I think Alice camera's colors are pretty accurate, pretty good in a way, and because some in the same situations when I tested in camera, I noticed that my normal digital camera, whether it's OMD or Nikon or anything else, I do notice some sort of color shifting, but Alice somehow managed to see colors how I would see it. So that's how powerful, potentially how powerful AI is going to be in the color science spectrum, because it's going to be something that we should be aware of, and especially, we are all photographers, right? We all think color is very important, because if you don't have the base color correct when it comes to editing, and everything is going to be wrong. This is why, like for me, I tend to adjust my own colors in a color space in the camera before I shoot, before every shoot really. So I make sure that the white is white and the gray is gray. That way I can have a more consistent result. I know sometimes when you shoot outdoor, that's impossible, but whenever I have the chance to do it, let's say if I'm shooting in studio, or when I'm shooting in a slightly more controlled environment, let's say if I'm shooting with strobes and flashlights, I know those are consistent, so I know the color has to be reflected correctly, and that way that everything will be calibrated, so that when I come to photograph whatever I'm photographing, and things will be consistent across the entire shoot. So when it comes to processing, everything just make my life a lot easier, so I don't have to like color correct everything. But when I don't, just using natural light, and there's always a variation there, because when the sun suddenly pop up for the split second, all the color changes, and so that happens. That's something that I would like to talk about in the futures, in just a moment. So let's see what else we have it right here. And Alfonso always says Olympus OM system innovation constantly. Eh? I do think so. Another thing that I would like to maybe brought you to your attention, it's slightly off topic at the moment, but while we're waiting for Rod, I'm sure that we can do something, right? So what do you think? What are you guys thinking about OM1 Mark II? And I know that many have perceived the OM1 Mark II isn't a big step from the OM1 Mark I, but now. After my visit to Japan, I noticed a couple of things about Japanese culture in general. Is that they don't mind incremental updates, and they don't mind little things, little updates or little changes, or little improvements, so long that they are practical. So like I noticed this is more or less their mentalities in Japan, and I find it quite true to how we see updates nowadays with a lot of the cameras, not just OM system, but other cameras as well. You see a lot of the Sony new models, and that if you really study the specs and really study the features, you often find that a lot of the camera updates are very minor. If you really study, no matter how much the marketing department changed the wording to make it sound like really exciting and things like, if you really study, then you realize a lot of these updates are very, very minimal. And I think we are now reaching a point when our cameras are so powerful and so capable, there isn't really much that needs to be improved, if you know what I mean. Because I can easily photograph anything that I'm doing right now professionally using an EM1 Mark II. I'm talking about Mark II, EM1 Mark II, not EM1 Mark III, not EM1X, not OM1 or OM1 Mark II. I can do everything that I'm doing right now with my EM1 Mark II. So that's how I think about camera these days. I can easily use a 6, 7, 8-year-old camera to do whatever I need to do, and I won't see any major improvements when it comes to image quality. I mean, of course, yes, maybe a little bit here and there, and I'm pretty certain if I go look at other brands as well, like I could easily use an older camera to do everything that I need to do without having to spend a fortune to get the latest and the greatest. So yeah, I think this is interesting. I think Rod is back, so let me switch it back to the interview room here. So yeah, we're just doing a little bit of off-topic talk at the moment, and because I think to me a lot of the I mean, I'm talking about improvements in cameras these days are so minimal. Like, if I know that we have updates, we have new models coming out every year, but if you really study the specification of these cameras, you often find that the actual improvements are very small. I know the marketing department will completely reword everything to make it sound incredible and sound really, really good. But in reality, when you really when you get the camera and when you start using it, then you start to realize that the improvement isn't really that great. And, and ultimately, a lot of these features or so-called new features are more or less a tweaked version of what they had already before. And most likely you will find that after a month or two, when the novelty wears out, you still go back to how you normally shoot, and then you find that everything is going to be, just back to how you shoot with your older cameras, in like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
But I was taking this topic out only because I just trying to say. Ask how people are thinking about the 0-1 Mark II and the 0-1, because a lot of people were thinking about or talking about the incremental updates weren't as exciting as what people might have thought. But my experience in Japan this time has gave me a lot of insights of how the Japanese culture is like, and also how they see little changes and little improvements can make a big deal, on the daily lives. And I think that sort of thing has translated in the camera updates that we have, and that's how I see it. As the more I spend the time in Japan, the more I realize these little things that I see every single day, whether it's going to be a public toilet, whether it's going to be on a train, things like that. I can talk a little bit about that at a separate time. But then little things, I always notice little things here and there in Japan that kind of think, okay, then why don't we have it in the UK? And why don't we see this and there? It just make me wonder, but it's little things. So they like little things that make your life better and easier. And that's how I think that's the culture. So in a lot of the product updates, and it's kind of in a similar sort of fashion as well, they do little updates, they do little things that they think is going to that's going to make your life a lot easier. Like, for instance, live grad NDs. Okay, many people may not use it, but for those who use grad ND features in a physical form, now you have a digital version. That may not sound a lot, but it actually helps me in my photography a lot when I go traveling, because I did used to bring a couple of grad NDs out, and then but now I don't have to, so I can completely leave all my filters now at home, and I just use that features to do some occasional high contrast scenes. And now that I can be able to balance the exposure simply by employing grad NDs in my photos. So it's a very simple procedure. It's a couple of clicks here and there, a little bit adjustment about the angle and where the position of the darkening area is, and it's all done for me in a couple of clicks. So I think it's very, very convenient for me. But there are little things. There are little things that may not affect everybody, but for those who do use it, just like these little things I saw in Japan, is that for those who do use it, I think, oh, this is a lifesaver. This is something that's really, really cool. So that's how I see it. But we're going to talk about it another time, perhaps. But now you're back. We can go back to artificial intelligence.
Apologies for that, everyone. It's just one of those days when everything's happening at once. So sorry I had to duck out there a little bit. Right. So what are we on? Are we on computational or AI? What are we on?
I think we gone past the computational now, and maybe we can start talking a little bit about the artificial intelligence. And I did ask a question about the audience, and just to keep that in mind. What sort of how you feel about artificial intelligence in digital photography, and there are obviously a lot of things that we can talk about AI. In camera developments, obviously we got subject recognition, so these are all kind of AI trained and things like that. But also in general photography wise, and about images, I'm more specific about images. AI is very different to computational. Computational, like you said, is a feature, is an enhancement. But AI is very different. And now maybe perhaps we will more specifically talk about generative AI. And this is something that I think is debatable. Is something that could potentially change everything that we see. We can talk a little bit about professional capacity, or maybe in the commercial space. And from a personal perspective, I want to see how photographers feel about generative AI. Would that change, things that you see these days? And let's say generative AI can completely generate an image from scratch with a few prompts.
It, yeah, so it's interesting. We saw some stuff, didn't we, at the Adobe event, which shows the direction we're heading with that. It's difficult, isn't it? Because do you want anything in your photographs that you didn't create or that you didn't capture? So it's one thing if we take pictures of skies and then later on we add them to our landscapes, we produced all of it. We're
Yeah,
combining them, which is like you could say that's cheating, but it's happened for decades.
yeah,
But then if you use an AI generated sky or use a AI sky replacement using skies offered by Adobe or On One software or whoever, then you're starting to introduce things you didn't photograph. So it's kind of halfway there because you're still talking about real photography, but you didn't do it. But then the generative AI thing, that's particularly interesting because you're not creating any of it except in terms of your prompt and what you asked for. So I think that does have some significance for photographers, but I'm not sure we're quite at the level of quality that all the headlines we see might suggest. So, for example, if you use generative fill in Photoshop to extend an image outside its boundaries, it's become apparent to me that the larger the area you add, the lower the resolution. So, unless you're adding just a very small amount of detail around the edges, you're going to find there's quite a step between the native resolution of your image and the bits that Photoshop has added. It's not so bad if you're working on a lower resolution image. Say you've got a 2K image, or let's say a 1920 by 1080 image. You can expand that and you won't see any difference. But if you've got a 24 megapixel image from your camera and you try expanding in Photoshop, it looks all right zoomed out. But when you zoom in, there's a very obvious step change in quality. So it's not as useful, I don't think, as it sounds like it will be. And as for the arguments about getting AI to create objects that you ask for to put in your scenes, I don't know. It's not photography as we understand it. But then if you talk to an artist, they would say, "Of course you will. You'll get stuff from everywhere." So
yeah,
so are we entering an era where photography, the boundary between photography and art or illustration is becoming even more blurred? I mean, it's blurred enough already, but is it now going to become very difficult indeed to say where photography with
yeah.
AI stops and where art and illustration start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting word there. I mean, like, I could take a couple of points from what you just said here. So I can see a transformation in the photographic space and really clearly split into two groups. First of all, professional photography, which is already are, being heavily impacted by the AI. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but it won't. I don't think it would change amateurs because the amateurs photographers who not necessarily need to submit the work for money, and they're just taking it for the pure enjoyment and or enjoying the process of creating the image that they want to photograph, like the process of actually going to the location, experience it yourself, and capture that. That is part of the joy of photography, right? You know, this is something that you enjoy. That's why you picked up photography as a hobby, and then you just get a camera out, just hike 10 miles to a cliff, and you just photograph something amazing. And
Jump off it.
yeah. So this is something that I think that certainly won't change because people just enjoy that process. The AI wouldn't come into it that much because I enjoy hiking. I enjoy capturing what I'm seeing, and that's of it. And of course, then we also talk about like maybe journalisms and documentary. These are facts that we need to record, and those obviously AI would definitely have no space in it. But when it comes to the other side, the professional side, I mean, it could potentially wipe out a lot of photographers' jobs, and product photography, is one specific space, because nowadays, like the generative AI can completely give you everything that you really need in terms of effects. And then all you need just to add the product itself in it. And the product itself now, majority of the product that you find these days are actually CAD images. They are actually 3D rendering images. So like the photographer used to spend hours setting up in the studio to photograph a subject, whether it be whiskey bottles or a Coke can or something, a watch or jewelry. Now they can do all that without touching the camera at all. And
I mean,
that's something quite scary.
I think, yeah, there's a couple of aspects to that. I think a couple of things have come out of the Adobe thing. I think we have this idea that AI is like the dam bursting, and suddenly AI is just going to inundate us all and everything around us. I think there are a few things in a way. It's like the devil is in the detail, as they say. One of them is that I think AI cannot, Adobe's AI anyway, cannot generate images and objects at the resolution we would expect in a full res still image. And the other thing is that Adobe used a phrase at this event, which I think is very significant. They said creators can use our Firefly 3 technology knowing it is commercially safe. So that means every object they generate is not an infringement of anyone's trademark or product. So that sounds like a good thing, right? But what it means is if you ask it to put a Jaguar XJS in the background of your photo, it won't, because that property is owned by somebody else. All it will do is give you, it'll either refuse, I haven't tried it, it'll either refuse, or it'll give you a generic rendering of what sports cars typically look like. And the same thing happens if you try to put people in your photographs. If they've got their back to you and you can't see their faces, it'll do a good job. If you have AI generated people facing the camera, their faces can often be like something out of a horror show, because I think Adobe is trying so hard not to copy anybody or anything that it's going too far in the opposite direction. So I think there'll be lots of players in this sphere who aren't as fussy as Adobe about protecting other people's properties, but sooner or later they'll get called out and stopped.
It's interesting because I think that I was trying Firefly the other day, and it's shocked what it can create. And just when you talked about people's faces, I actually did try. I don't know if I have the image actually. If I have, I can share it. I was basically typing the prompt, and I said a lady on the beach. It actually drew, create, not drew, but created an image of a lady, and it's actually proper. There was I don't know how it generated. It wasn't.
It can do, but it won't always. So when you get three versions to choose from. I tried this on one of the images Adobe offered. It's a couch in a garden or something like that. I tried adding an artist to the couch, and one of them looked like a real person. It passed as a real person. The other two, their noses, they're like something like Picasso. Their noses were up here and had one eye down there, and it's awful. I mean that will improve, but I do think that this idea of being commercially safe is gradually going to catch up on all AI creation tools. I think you'll get to a point where if you do want, I picked this out of the air, an image of a Jaguar XJS in the background of your image, you are going to have permission from either a stock library or a stock content creator or from Jaguar to do that. So it's not really the free-for-all we worried it might be.
No, I mean, obviously, I may have exaggerated a little bit, but I can see where the direction is heading, and like certainly for some smaller scale commercial photography, and they could be in jeopardy, their business, because to me anyway, a lot of the product photography can be completely replaced by AI, completely replaced by computer generated images, whether it's going to be CAD in combination of AI generated background or effects. It's something I think I'm quite worried. those people. I think to be honest,
a lot of the press photography I've used for news stories and articles over the years, a lot of that from quite well-known camera makers is 3D renders. It's only the smaller outfits who will actually photograph a real product. Usually, the bigger makers will get a 3D artist to make
Yeah.
a series of renders
Yeah.
just so they have a clean image. And that's been going on for a while. I don't know whether AI will make 3D renders any easier. I don't know too much
Not, not
about that.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I don't think just yet, simply because the processing power that requires for such renders, could be more significant than a still 2D image, and I think that could be slightly different. Carl just posted a comment there about a Lightroom blur function. I don't know if anyone has tried that. It's still in beta form, but it's accessible. And pretty cool. Oh, can you hear me?
I
Yep.
will I will say one thing. I will say one thing. Don't try it on a subject you can see through, that's got any gaps in it or holes in it. Because it's fine with outlines, but it's not so good at recognizing when there's something you can see through.
Yeah, yeah,
So you might have to get a bit manual with that. But
yeah, yeah. Well, there are certain menu tweaks you can do, adjusting the mask and things like that in that particular feature. So you can be quite precise. But like you said, if there are multiple layers in between and see-through layers, and that could be a trouble, because then you can clearly see there will be some sort of manipulations going there.
yeah, it's clever. It will get clever, and I agree that is a godsend. I'm waiting for the day though when people finally get tired of background blur, and then suddenly we're buying AI software that will sharpen blurred backgrounds instead, so that we look like we've got lots of depth of field. We'll see. Um, but I agree with you about it's a worrying time for, I think it's a worrying time for photographers running just small commercial studios,
Yeah.
because AI could end up doing a lot of the stuff they currently do. Having said that, maybe their business will suddenly get a lot cheaper to run because they don't have to hire the studio.
Yeah.
And if a client, they might still have the same kind of client journey. The client says, I need some realistic looking images of this, and this. Maybe those photographers can then move to smaller premises and just get a more powerful workstation or whatever, and use AI to generate the images the client wants.
Yeah, so that's where the boundary used to draw very clearly. I mean, there is photographer who photograph the object, then
Yeah,
there are effects specialists or digital artists who add
yeah,
effects or other things onto the subject to create commercial pieces. But you can
yeah.
see that now you can literally have just one person doing all of these jobs, and then
But
potentially,
will they do it very well? Because there is still the artistry and the craft don't just lie in the power of your software. They lie in your visual sense and taste. And I don't
there
think,
is.
yeah,
And I mean, I guess but then depends on whoever that person is, and so during this transition period, I would call it transition period, and the talented who are very proficient in both photography, have an eye for photography, but also very good with the digital manipulations and photoshopping. These are potentially be the one who's going to be right on with the AI space and going to the future, where a lot of the more traditional photographers who are doing the very old school fashion way, setting up strobes and lights in the studio, photograph certain objects and subject for clients and still objects, and relying on other digital artists to manipulate the photos for the client, or having a digital artist in-house to do that work for them. And these potentially will be the one who's suffering, because their outlay is higher and it costs more because you have to have a separate person to do that manipulation work for them, and the cost of the studio itself is not cheap. Like when you photograph something like this, yeah, it could be
but
interesting to see.
but do you? I think now you can clearly see the just as you can see the difference between an image that's been digitally retouched and one that was shot perfectly in the first place.
Yeah,
I think you will probably, for a long time to come, be able to see the difference between AI generated images and actual images.
Yeah.
But I guess the question is whether the client cares, because there may
Yeah.
well be a certain sort of client who
Yeah.
doesn't mind it all being a bit naff as long as it's cheap. Um, but there may also be clients who say, yes, I know it's going to cost more, but this has to look right,
Yeah.
because there may be like certain luxury brands who cannot afford the
No.
shame of a Photoshop
Yeah.
fail, for
No, I
example.
mean, luxury brands are totally different beast altogether. Like
Yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
likely they're gonna have some celebrities endorsing the images anyway. So like for those, they're gonna set up the whole scene just for them. They pay so much money for them. They're gonna have to
Yeah.
look the part, in the photos. I mean, there's still obviously retouchers there helping to make the images look stand out and look, make them look the best, make the product look the best, and so that won't change. I don't think that will change anytime soon. But certainly, certain backgrounds, maybe certain effects, is still going to be AI generated, and but the bulk of the work is still going to be on the photography side because they still need the practical skills to do that, the lighting, the angle, everything still need to be set up for that type of photo shoots. So I don't think that is going to change for luxury brands, but certainly like you said, the lower end, the smaller production house are those ones going to be have to think deep and hard about AI.
I think as well there are troubled waters ahead for camera clubs. So I don't know if anyone here goes to a camera club, and I don't want to offend anyone who does, but camera clubs are exactly the sort of place where people will embrace AI and not notice the rough edges. So already, you can get to see some quite ham-fisted HDR or black and white treatments or portrait retouching, that kind of thing. The minute AI kind of gets into the whole camera club scene, I think we haven't seen anything yet. So just get ready for that. Get ready for that.
Yeah, I mean, where do you draw the line, right? And especially in the last couple of years, we see competition winners are using manipulated images and
I
AI
think
images. It's tricky, right?
but it depend on how we define the competition, because and what you consider photography to be. Because if you're going to get upset over the use of AI, you're going to have to define the competition quite carefully. You're going to have
Yeah,
to say a single exposure with no additional elements added, artificial or otherwise.
yeah,
And if the entrants understand that and they're caught, well, they deserve it. And I think a lot of photographers would approve of that kind of competition, because not everybody wants to introduce new artificial elements into their images. It's the kind of thing you would do if you're an illustrator or an artist or a commercial photographer or an advertising photographer, because in those situations, you're not trying to record anything that actually existed. You're
no,
trying to create an idea or a
yep,
feeling or a
yep,
scenario.
yep,
But if for example, this I think this is where it's come up most often. If you're a wildlife photographer who is committed to accurately and truthfully recording the natural world, then that's where you're going to get this clash, and you're going to get cheats being called out and people getting very upset
yep.
that an image they thought was real has been fabricated.
Yeah, that's certainly something to think about. It's interesting now. Let's mix up a little bit because we see a lot of photographers, even past masters. I'm talking about. Some of you may have may be familiar with the photographer I'm talking about, and I mentioned him before. It's a Chinese Hong Kong photographer, more specifically called Fan Ho. He's a very known street photographer back in the 60s and 70s, and his work is masterful. And if you look at his early works and the way he utilized light and shadow is just simply amazing. But if you look at his later work, and he's transforming himself from being a street photographer to more of a visual artist. So a lot of his later work is starting to have a lot of montages, and it comprises of photo that he took, and he just cut bits of it and put them together. So and this is something that I think that to him is still photography, because he took all these little photos and just combined them together, but it forms an artwork out of it. So I don't know, like something similar that we can say in today's digital world that we have now. We can photograph parts of it, we can photograph all of it, but then we use bits of everything that we photograph and combine with something. Or similarly, using generative AI, and like what Adobe is saying, that it's all coming, all these bits are coming up from our stock library. So it's literally coming from bits that it owns.
How different is using AI to using bits of stock images? It's not that different.
No.
One, you're still using content produced outside of your own body of work. I think it's a matter of conscience and the kind of art we want to create. The idea of creating montages has been happening for 100 years. It's a particular form of art. So I think rather than saying a photographer is no longer a photographer because they now work in this way, I think you can say that, but it doesn't mean they're any less of an artist. They simply moved from literal photography into a different kind of figurative art. So they haven't really undermined photography. All they've done is migrate to a different line of work, I think. And the idea about I think that's the thing that troubles me most, adding external elements. I will do all sorts of things to my images to exaggerate, enhance, and improve them in my eyes. But I think as soon as I add something else, I feel in a funny way, I've taken something away. So you can create a very spectacular landscape by using AI sky replacement. But what you're left with, while it's striking visually, it's somehow less of a thing because it's not all yours. So that does bother me a bit. So I see Andrew's made a comment that if I don't like adding things, what about cloning out elements, taking things away? I don't mind that at all. I don't mind. I mean, but this is what photographers have done for ages. Even the act of choosing where you stand and where you point the camera is excluding things from the scene. So we've always done this. And I don't think cloning. I don't think cloning is really any different. It's clever, but it's no different. We still only want people to see what we want them to see. That's what we've always done. So I don't think there's a philosophical problem there.
No, and I mean, like in a commercial space, like. Taking things out is always a part of the big thing, right? Like even in fashion photography, all these magazines and things like that, you see things being taken away, things being, manipulated, the skin, all the freckles are gone. These are removing things. They're cloning the skin out of the, like the heck out of it. So like making your skin nice and smooth, and then when the actual real person isn't anything near that. So
that's an interesting thing in itself, isn't it? So. If, for example, in your line of work, Jimmy's, people want photographs of themselves, so that if you use AI, and there's plenty of that now, to smooth the skin, widen the eyes, take out the bags, like make the teeth whiter, make the face a little slimmer. I could use some of this. Then you are making them more attractive in a kind of universal way, but you're making them less and less themselves. So you're changing them from an individual into a type, and that's not necessarily what your subjects will want.
And that's certainly debatable, but certain subjects may actually want that to happen. That may actually that's the ideal version of them.
I agree. I think you'll always get people who want a portrait photographer who can make them look like this celebrity or that celebrity or that person. They don't particularly want to look like themselves. So I think that will always happen.
But I mean, just in response to Andrew's comment again about cloning, I specifically find the latest generations AI generative replacement, for instance, or is to me is actually more beneficial to what Carl said earlier about the bokeh, the fake bokeh
Yes, yes.
feature. And to me, I mean, like, especially in the commercial space, for instance, a lot of the time when I photograph my clients in even very early in the morning in central London, we're supposed to have a really empty space all to ourselves, but ever so often there's always a
Yeah,
couple of strangers lurking behind the background that you say, oh, come on, this, but and because of the time restriction that I have for that particular session, I mean, I have to complete that shoot in a specific time, and I can't wait around until there's absolutely empty, to do that. I mean, we don't have the
no,
budget to close off the entire area to do the shoot, so we always have to do it in real time. So that means that random stranger could be walking in front or behind, whatever, things could happen. So these kind of AI regenerative cloning or whatever you want to call it, a removal, is cool. You really just basically circle the subject in the background, and it literally takes about 5 seconds, and that thing will be completely disappear. And with a lot of convincing details that would otherwise spend me hours to trying to clone out the that particular person. And from that point of view, I think it really is something that I personally I think that is
it's very
it's the
effective.
best features.
Yeah, I mean, for example, in my situation, I take a shot of a lens or a camera for a review, but the site I write for has ridiculous aspect ratio for its header images at the top of the review. So it's like 21:9. So even though you try and visualize it when you take the shot, it's very rare to be able to get a shot where you've actually got an image with a 21:9 ratio where you haven't cropped off a bit at the top of the bottom. So this generative fill at the edges, if I recrop outside the original boundary, incredibly useful.
Yeah.
I suppose I don't feel I'm adding anything that wasn't there already, because it's kind of taking a sample of what was there to make the enlarged area. But I think the broad point is, yes, whether we're adding to or subtracting from an image, we are altering reality. But I think, honestly, we've always done that. We have though, haven't we? We have. It's just we don't necessarily approve of the latest and newest methods of doing it.
So now, maybe in a more educational sense, now we talk about AI stuff. We kind of explore a lot of different angles, a lot of different usage, and the latest crop of AI features. How should a photographer embrace, or how in your view, how do they think, how do they should be thinking about AI in their photography? Should they, to learn it and to experiment it and use it in the photography in a more constructive way, or you think they should avoid it altogether until they master the skills and things like that? Because people are always jumping when new technology comes out, and then they think that technology can rescue the fundamentals in photography, the skills. Someone earlier talked about color science and all the other stuff, But like for instance, let's go back a little bit even more on the technical terms. We got AI subject recognitions. Should you really be learning how to focus first without any sort of assistant before you start employing all these new features? Then we're going to move on to like like the live ND or live grade ND, whatever. Should you really be understanding exposures? Should you be understanding motion blur before you kind of start employing these kind of features in the camera? So let's talk a little bit about first before we move on to the images itself.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said for knowing how stuff works, because if you don't know how it works, you won't understand the tools you're using. So I think exposure theory might seem very boring and long-winded and irrelevant today when your cameras can do the exposure for you. But if you don't understand what the camera's doing, you won't understand when it's got it wrong. And you won't understand how you can make an image look if you take over. So with a modern camera, you can just stick it in P mode. It'll figure out the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. You don't have to do anything. But you won't be able to exploit the kind of creative effects you get from different apertures and from different shutter speeds. If you don't understand those things, you're going to be in a kind of creative funnel where you're just turning out the same kind of pictures as everybody else, because you don't know what the camera can do. I think with focusing is an interesting one because autofocus has kind of trained everyone to imagine that you focus on one thing and that's it. Everyone's forgotten what depth of field is, whereas everyone used to know. And it's actually a very important thing to know. So the idea that so a modern photographer will think, right, where's my subject? I'll focus on that. An old school photographer will say, no, which zone in front of the camera do I need sharp? Do I need that building sharp? Do I need this foreground object sharp? I'll focus between them. That is something that's been completely lost in the era of auto. So I think there's a lot to be said for, even if you then use everything on automatic, you do need to know what the camera's doing.
Yeah, I think very, very wise word there, and especially when it comes to depth, especially comes to depth of field. I think that people really may have forgotten about it, and there is reason why I still encourage new photographers to explore and try out, zone focus, for instance, because that will give you a lot of understanding about how to control the zone in focus, by using depth of field. And it's a very useful tool, very useful learning process and learning curve for you to actually understand and perhaps even explore in the futures when you advance to a more sophisticated photography yourself, because it helps you understand a lot more than just pinpoint focus that what everybody else does these days.
Well, it does. I think if you don't have an understanding of focusing, I think you might get a modern user who's only ever used the latest mirrorless cameras on auto, and you might have to explain to them, look, if you're going to shoot at f2 or f1.4, you know that you're only going to have one thing sharp and everything else will be soft. You know that, don't you?
Yeah.
No, it didn't really. It's you have to understand the basics, I think.
Yeah,
to really make a lot of progress.
And also, I think that the trouble many a new photographer who bought into these kind of like a bocalicious photos and and shooting with this extremely fast lenses, especially in full frame, because it's less forgiving when it comes to shallow depth of field, and you will have this extremely fine line of focused areas in in these 1.2 1.4 lenses.
Well, yeah, I mean you don't necessarily get what you think you're going to get if you do a fairly close-up portrait at f1.2. People might say it's fine, I just want the eye sharp, but you've got to say which part of the eye.
Yeah.
So they're going to say, the middle. Then you have to say, well, the eyelashes are going to be blurred then, don't you?
Yeah.
And this is what people don't quite get. I think it's not as simple as saying, I know I can only have one eye in focus because the other one's further away. It's a lot worse than that. You can't have the whole eye sharp. That's what you've got to think about.
It's quite funny because I have a friend and who spoke to me the other day, and then he said, he's a new photographer, so he did admit to me that he doesn't know too much about photography, but then he bought a new Sony camera with a 51.4, so it's a nice piece of kit. But he said every time I photograph my family, my wife always complained it's only one person in focus because he shot everything in 1.4, and I said, you got a nice background blur, your subject separations, but then you only get one person in focus all the time. And I told him, you just have this. All you need to do is just stop it down to 2.8 or maybe 3.5, and most of the time you get your whole family in focus, and while you're still getting some separation, and then it's a trade-off, and this is about understanding depth of field, like you said.
So then he says, so I could have got cheap f2.8. But I think this is especially relevant in commercial photography. So if for example you're a car photographer, you've got two cars. The client wants their Aston Martin in foreground to one side. Both got to be sharp. You've got to do some thinking. You've got to know a bit about. You've got to know about depth of field. You've got to know about focus stacking and how to do it. And this isn't This isn't something you can do with a kind of point and shoot knowledge. You do have to know how stuff works.
That's right. Yeah. So that's
But
interesting. It's an interesting thing. So now let's jump off to images, and now we'll talk a little bit about camera. Maybe it's time to let's start talking a little bit about images. So how should a photographer embrace artificial intelligence in their photography?
I would, if you're asking me, I would say decide what you're making and what it's for. And that will tell you what it's okay to do and what you should try. So if you are a documentary photographer or wildlife photographer, you're probably very concerned with accuracy and truthfulness. So in that case, I think the only respects in which AI can help you with things are with things like focusing, because a good AI AF system these days will find the right subject faster than you ever could manually, probably. Um, if, however, you are a kind of, let's say you're a landscape photographer producing wall art that you're going to
Yep.
sell, that's a little bit different. If you're doing a brochure for a tourist location, you probably have to be factual because you could get into hot water if you fabricate a scene to sell a holiday or a tour. But if you are like a kind of figurative landscape photographer just producing art, then what the heck, I suppose AI's sky replacement, do what you like. You're not trying to prove anything. This isn't evidence of anything. This is just a nice, satisfying image. So
Yep.
I think you have to decide what it is you're making, and that will tell you how much AI you should be using.
That's another wise word lesson from Rod. I, I personally think so, and I would say that from my images and a lot of my personal work, and I stay with the truth and the fact in time and space. I respect that, so I'm not going to change all of those stuff. But when it comes to commercial photography, for instance, let's say photographing my client, and like I said earlier, if I have some stranger lurking around in the background, and that it's not supposed to be there, then I may
No.
use the generative AI to remove that person completely, and it's been proven to be quite good, because normally I would just
Yeah.
basically clone it out anyway. So now
Yeah.
it's just now I have a better and more accurate tools allow me to remove it more convincingly and better in that sense.
So
So I think it's
it's a
good.
lot. Yeah. It's a lot quicker. Clone. You can do amazing things with old school cloning, but it takes a while, and you have to know what to do and how to do it. So AI replacement is the
I like
thing. Yeah.
I like what Andrew just said
Yeah.
there. As long as AI doesn't become a thing in crime scene photography.
Well, then the police are going to be in trouble, aren't they? Because if they get caught, then they'll be held to
Yeah.
pay. So I think this is the crux of it. I producing a kind of evidential photography designed to depict things as they are,
Yep.
and that's the point of it. Are you producing art that's just a satisfying image to look at? Are you producing images for a client who wants things to look a certain way and to look? In which case, it's then their business. But I
Yep.
think if in portrait photography, if you do have clients who want to look lovely and not like themselves at all, then AI is an absolute godsend, because things like
Yeah.
portrait professional, it just does a remarkable job. It can find all your facial features. It can do kind of baseline improvements like squish your face a bit, smooth your skin, brighten your eyes, change your eye color, change your hair color, whatever, whatever. If you want a kind of idealized reality and you're not trying actual reality, AI can do remarkable things. You might as well embrace it, because sooner or later the clients are going to want that kind of idealized reality. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
advertising
Absolutely.
agencies do already.
Great. Well, good. And so I hope you guys understand a little bit about AI, and hopefully got a bit of idea from what we just talked about today. And do let us know about your thoughts about artificial intelligence in photography, because it would be good to understand from your perspective and how you feel about the whole thing, and whether any of you have used any of these generative AI in your photography so far. And it's still new things. I know not many of you may have tried it, or have the access to generative AI. And if some of you are Adobe users, I'm pretty sure that you may have tried it once or twice already, and they are certainly improving. And so we only time will tell how useful and how good they can be in the future.
I'll give you an example of how low I will sink. So if I'm asked to do an edited tutorial for a website or a magazine, and I feel I've used up all my own stock photography because I only shoot a certain kind of thing in a certain kind of way, I need a bit of variety. In the past, I might have used a free royalty-free photo library like Pexels or Pixabay or Unsplash. See if I can find something there. Credit the photographer, of course. But now I can simply type in an AI prompt and
Yeah.
get a commercially safe image. I don't have to pay for and don't have to credit. That's outside the kind of thing I normally shoot. So the other day, the prompt I used was a blizzard, a winter blizzard in Weston-super-Mare. That's where I live, Weston-super-Mare. And what it came back with, it wasn't at all like Weston-super-Mare, but it was an interesting looking image that was real enough and detailed enough for me to use for a tutorial. So you could say that's a dreadful use of AI because I'm cheating by not using my own photography. But the point of these tutorials is not whether I'm a good photographer or not, or whether I have any interesting photographs, but how to do this thing or that thing to improve an image.
Yeah.
So it's an example of the purpose you have and what's expected of your images. That is a kind of guide to whether AI is appropriate or not, I think.
Yes, certainly. Um, Another thing I think that's quite interesting is that obviously for those who are professional photographers, I'm not sure how many of you are professional photographer and how it impacts in your business, and whether it's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing. So something I think would be quite. Oh, is it working? Not working? My audio.
Yeah, you're back. You're back. So I'd be
And
interested to
once,
know.
right, once. Okay, I think my audio just went. I'm trying a few things at the moment because it's keeping going in and out at the moment. Sorry about that. Let me see. Right, is it working?
It is at the moment, yes.
Right, okay. Yep, and so I may want to cut this short today because this audio is driving me nuts at the moment. It's going in and out my ear like crazy, and so hopefully I'll fix that for next week. But yeah, please do leave some comment down below and about your thoughts about AI and things, because people may not realize how big a thing it is in photography, certainly in the commercials side of it, but as even for personal use. And I think that, I mean, like some of you already said, that whether it's going to be for visual arts or actual photography, you just have to respect both sides. I don't think there's right and wrong answers there. If you're just simply creating a visual art, and there's nothing wrong about using generative AI to create elements in in the image itself. I wouldn't call it photograph, but create the artwork itself. And but if you are a pure photographer, you just gotta respect that. Photography is something that you want to capture. You enjoy the process of making the image, going to the place and then experience the actual place itself, and you want to capture that atmosphere in the photograph itself. And these are things that cannot be replaced with AI. AI is purely
I
a
think
and kind of like an imagery side of it more than the actual experience.
I think as well that with photography, you are constantly surprised by what the world looks like and what you see. It's
Yep.
this kind of discovery, which AI is not. AI is a kind of synthesis of what you want and what you expect. If you feel that photography is about discovery and you are constantly surprised and amazed by the world around you, then AI is not going to help.
No.
And I don't think it's a good direction to go. So
Yep.
I'm in. I've got a foot in both camps, and I think a lot of people will have. If I wanted to show that I was a good photographer, I wouldn't use AI. That won't be the point. And there'd be some projects where I'm more amazed by the place I've gone to or the thing I've seen. I think that's enough. I don't need to embellish it, distort it,
Yep.
add some half-baked bit of imaginary nonsense into it,
Yep.
because it's already what it should be. So I can see both angles.
Yep, absolutely. So we'd like to see how you think about it, and please do leave some comment below. And also what we'd like to talk about for our next session next week, and hopefully we're gonna get some interesting topic to talk about in photography. And just to let you know, for those who may be wondering, is that this week's thumbnail, if you can go back to it, is actually using Adobe Firefly to generate the complete background image. And I just want you guys to see it and how crazy it is for generative AI. And I literally just typed a prompt and a lighthouse being hit by storm windy wave, and it just came out like that. I mean, this is actually the fourth version that I selected, because the first few versions were pretty mediocre, to say the best. The lighthouse, if you inspect closely, you find that the railing was just all over the place, and things were just not quite real in a sense, and it's just not real. And but the fourth version I generated is actually pretty convincing. Still not perfect, but I just want to illustrate what you can do with generative AI these days. And like Rod just said earlier, because these are AI, these are based on learning data, it can only get better. So, over time, in 4-5 years time, they could be a lot more convincing. Perhaps the AI would actually check itself to see if there is any artifacts that it needs to be fixed before it even generated the final image, the result to you to see. So that could be an interesting space to watch out in the next few years for sure. Okay, and I guess we're gonna have to say goodbye. And not that I don't want to speak to you guys longer, simply because like I said, the audio has been driving me nuts at the moment, and it's something I really need to fix for next week. And that's for sure. And okay, if any of you want to have some thoughts about it, and let us know in the comment section below. I'm sure that we're going to talk about it next week, and also we have a new topic. Yes. So I guess until next time, we will speak to you all very, very soon. And